Welcome back to Introducing Virginia Mysteries. I'm Andrew Wood. Episode number 5, Heist and Go Seek. This episode focuses on S.A. Cosby's debut novel, Blacktop Wasteland. And we got the very special privilege of interviewing Mr. Cosby himself. Be warned, this episode will include spoilers to this book and does contain several adult topics, so please be mindful when listening with children. Here is Libby and Febronia with their discussion of the book.
Okay, so you've been studying Blacktop Wasteland by Sean Cosby.
Yep.
Can you tell us a little about both the book and your author?
It would be my pleasure. So, Blacktop Wasteland is about this man. Oh my god, we need to stop.
What?
I can't remember how to say his name. It's Beauregard Bug. How do you say his last name?
I don't know what his last name is.
Beauregard
I don't think it's Montag in the end, is it?
Montage.
Thank you. Okay,
just
starting again.
resume.
So it's about this guy, Beauregard, affectionately nicknamed Bug Montage, and he is just kind of your working man. He is trying to be a father. He's trying to just, run his auto shop that he, is trying to keep afloat amidst all the big, companies. And he also is just trying to help his mother, who he's keeping in a nursing home because he can't take care of her anymore. And he's just, all around just trying to stay on the straight and narrow path, right? But the book begins with him at this kind of this kind of racing thing, because he's got this car, the Duster, that is his father's, right? His father's car, and he has a complicated relationship with his father. He always saw him as this kind of almost mythical figure. He was such a he was a very strong man, he didn't let anybody take anything from him type of dude, right? And then he ends up running away from him and his mother when he's young. So that Duster, the car, is the only thing that he has left of his father. So, and it's a very, very fast car. He knows his way around a car. He can, all that stuff. So, I'm not good with cars, can you tell? So, I don't think it's
I think you're great with cars.
I think I'm solid golden. But no, so he kind of has this addiction to thrill seeking almost. He's always chasing that high, that feeling, which can sometimes interrupt his life when he is trying to be a good father to his 3 kids and be a good husband to his wife. And so he gets offered this getaway. He's a getaway driver, and he gets offered a job to get these people in and out of a crime scene, right? And he's not going to take it at first because he doesn't want to get back into that lifestyle. But then he realizes he needs the money to keep his, mother at the nursing home. He needs the money so that his kids can get glasses and braces. He needs this money so that, his daughter can go to college, the college that she wants to go to. So it's the good outweighs the evil, so he decides he needs to go do it, right? So long story short, he, does the getaway drive, whatever, and some things go wrong throughout the story, and he gets caught up in that lifestyle again. He has to, try to get himself out of it, try to, make sure his family stays out of it. It's just, kind of talking, going through his struggles with that. S.A. Cosby, we got to meet him in an interview as well. Wonderful man. Nice. Love him. He's, a very down-to-earth guy, and so he kind of reflects that in his story. It's a very down-to-earth story. It's something that could happen to anybody, not just Bug. It's very reflective of that. So he kind of talked to me about how, he kind of had a rough lifestyle growing up, in a rural, primarily black neighborhood, especially, I forget when he was born, probably the 70s, 80s type of time. Mm-hmm. It would have been hard. It would have been very difficult, very rough to try to get yourself going in that kind of environment. he said, a lot of people tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, but if you don't have boots, that's not going to get you very far. He has to get something out of nothing. So it's very, he really shows a lot of that in the book. His like, a lot of it is very personal, and you could tell that throughout, with talking to him and reading the book. So I think I really enjoyed that aspect a lot. But, a lot of the things that we've already talked about, intergenerational trauma, it's hard to break past that. Bug and his dad, Anthony, they have a very tumultuous relationship where his dad leaves a lot but comes back, and he's trying to, it's the same thing that Bug is trying to do. He's just trying to make a better life for his family, but unfortunately that comes at the cost of the cycle continuing, and nothing good comes out of that. So he's trying to help his sons, help his daughter throughout the book, but unfortunately there's a moment in the book where his oldest son goes and sets fire to the auto shop that's running his father's auto shop out of business, because he's like, I can see how it's hurting my family. I don't want that to hurt my family, so I'm going to go fix it, take care of it. That's a very it's a big mentality throughout the story, is I need to fix it for my family so that my family's okay. But there's that kind of theme throughout the story, and I mean, we've talked about Poe a lot, obviously. I mean, the fall of the House of Usher, they have, the brother and sister have a very, odd relationship, because they're cooped up in this house that's been in their family for generations, and they don't, ultimately their downfall comes because they don't have anybody else. It's a very, they just don't have a very great thing going for them, not a very good environment, because they don't have anybody else, So I kind of thought about that throughout the story. But another big theme was, how do I say it? Like love for men. I don't know how to say it other than that. A lot of men, like masculinity, the theme of masculinity, right? I think his book really had a great view on what masculinity should be and what it should look like. A lot of men don't show love for each other, like they don't hug. They're like, oh, buddy, bring it here, Boom, I scratched you, I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
So it's you don't see a lot of affection for each other, and Bug, his cousin Calvin, they have a very strong relationship. They are very loyal to each other, and that's a great thing for a lot of men to see today. I think they need the kind of role model that shows, hey, I can be okay, I can show my feelings, I can be vulnerable with the people I love, because they won't ridicule me for it. They won't think that I'm weak for it, because that's what a lot of it is being showing weakness. That's something that is not very manly. But so I thought that was really, really important for people to read, and I think it's a really great thing for people to know can happen, But yeah, I think that those were kind of the big themes that I saw throughout, and just the cycle of trying to get out of, your tough situation, which I thought was really, really powerful and moving.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then obviously the book is set in Virginia. It's a more rural area of Virginia, and that it shows the good and the bad. As we've said, a lot of people know your business. A lot of people will try to take advantage of you, depending on what race you are, what gender you are, things like that. They think they know you, but they don't. It's a lot of that, and it's just a very, I think it can show that Virginia is a place where, yes, sometimes things go wrong, and that's, but also it's a place of, this is where my home is, this is where my family is, and I want to do what I can to give them a good life type of situation.
Before we get to our interview with S.A. Cosby, this episode's cover is a picture of the students and Dr. Stacy Jacoy, brilliant librarian and musicologist in the Library of Congress, who was very, very gracious to give us a presentation on early Virginian music history, as well as feature presentation by her colleague, Dr. Virginia Wheelton, who has a new book coming out. But here is Libby and S.A. Cosby.
please tell us about how you became a writer. Have you always wanted to be a storyteller?
Yeah, I think so. I was surrounded by readers growing up. My mom read historical novels, biographies. My grandmother read romance novels. My uncle read mystery novels. My aunt read horror novels. They all lived around me. We were in a sort of family commune sort of place. In a rural area, we always lived near family. So my uncle lived with me and my grandmother and my mom, and my aunt lived across the road. So I've always been surrounded by readers. And my mom also read to me as a child, and she would read bedtime stories to me. And I remember she would get irritated because I would complain about the logic in the bedtime stories didn't make any sense. I would complain like, why did the three little pigs build their first house out of straw and the second one out of sticks? If they had a whole pile of bricks over there, they could have started with them. And so those sort of precocious questions. And my mother got a little upset one day. She said, "You know what? Why don't you write your own damn story?" And I was like, "I will." And so I wrote a story for her about these space traveling gnomes that land in our backyard under our magnolia tree, and they have to fight off they have to fight off the resident elves that live there. So it was this intergalactic fantasy epic in 3 pages. And you know, uh, when she realized I'd written it by myself, it was like she had this great epiphany, and the look on her face when she realized I had done it. I think I've been chasing that look the rest of my life. So, in high school, I continued writing. In high school, I used to write stories about some of the teachers we didn't like, and one of my teachers who I did like found one of those stories and asked me to stay after class one day. He really encouraged me to take creative writing in college, or works with an MFA or something of that nature. So fast forward to college. I'm in college 2 years, and unfortunately, I have to come out. My mom is really sick, or was really sick, I should say. So I came out, and then, but I continued writing. I educated myself on writing. I bought books like, Stephen King's on writing, or Story by Robert McKee. Really great. Both of those are really great. So anyway, fast forward a little bit more. And I started writing short stories, fantasy novels, all these different genres, trying to find my place. And a friend of mine, she went to New York City, and she's a performer. She's a belly dancer. And she met, after her performance, her and her troupe just happened to go into this bar in New York City run by a guy named Todd Robinson. Todd Robinson, in addition to running a bar, used to run a magazine called Thuglit. It was a hard-boiled, hardcore crime and mystery magazine based out of New York. And when she came home, she said, I met this guy, he pays for short stories. Todd felt like writers should earn money for their stories. Back then, a lot of places like to pay you in exposure. This would be a great exposure for your story. I'm like, yeah, but Dominion Power doesn't take exposure for payments. But anyway, Todd really helped start my career as a mystery writer. I wrote my first mystery story for him. I had kind of hesitated on writing mystery because, again, coming from a small town, it's rarely a whodunit in real life. You're in a small town, everybody knows who did it, just got to prove it. And so, but I started writing through that apparatus. And then I met an agent, and if this was a fairy tale, when you meet the first agent, and like, oh, that changed my life. Everything's roses now. But that agent was a really nice gentleman. But unfortunately, we didn't connect on our work. And I think if you're a writer, when you start pursuing an agent, it's like meeting a new friend. You got to be on the same page. You got to connect. So only after a year, he dropped me. He said just wasn't working out. No harm, no foul. It's a business, And then I wrote Blacktop Wasteland because I'd already written a novel called My Darkest Prayer. That was the one that hadn't sold. And so I decided to write something from scratch, sort of something that entails all the things that I was interested in at the time. Masculinity, both tragic and toxic, generational trauma, poverty, class struggles, violence, how violence is a confession of pain and things of that nature. And so I wrote that book, and then I sat on it for a while. And then I finally met my current agent at a festival in St. Petersburg. And anyway, I rambled on, but long story short, he did change my life, and he was able to sell Blacktop Wasteland, and and we went on from there.
That's so cool to hear. I'd like to, I don't know, are those space gnome stories available?
Yeah, they didn't have much character. They didn't have much character development.
No, that's wonderful to hear. I'm curious, did any authors in particular inspire you towards your own interest in writing? For example, do you happen to have like a favorite Edgar Allan Poe story or poem,
Yeah.
or do you have a favorite Elmer Leonard story?
Oh yeah.
Things like that.
I am and was and still continue to be a big reader. I think the first book I love Poe, and I love I loved a lot of the weird writers from the 20s and 40s. So Robert Bloch, Poe, Algernon Blackwood, folks like that, C.M. Kornbluth, Clark Ashton Smith. A lot of names nobody knows anymore today. But anyway, and then I also read a lot of mystery stories from the 40s and 50s, Chandler and Ross McDonald and stuff like that. And I think the first book that really sort of settled in my mind, I want to be a writer because I want people to feel this when they read something I write, was Salem's Lot. Salem's Lot was the first book that I read that wasn't like, the Three Investigators or the Hardy Boys or Nancy Drew or Encyclopedia Brown. It was a grown-up book. It was an adult book. And I mean, in a different connotation than some people may take that. And what I mean is, it was a serious book. I mean, it's vampires, but it was a lot of serious stuff going on in that book. And I remember I started it Friday evening one weekend, and I had read the whole thing by Saturday morning. I read it all through the night. And I was like, I want that connection with people. I want somebody to feel that way about my books. So that was really the first. But there's so many books that have had an influence on me. You mentioned Elmer Leonard, Walter Mosley, Dennis Lehane. Walter Mosley and Dennis Lehane are probably, as far as crime writing go, my two biggest influences. But there are my contemporaries that I find amazing. Well, Jennifer Hillier, Jordan Harper, Kelly Garrett. Folks are doing really, really, really interesting stuff with crime fiction as a genre.
Nice. This is just a little follow-up. What do you like most about Elmore Leonard's approach to storytelling, just out of curiosity?
I think it's his pure commitment to story. He doesn't worry about grammar. He doesn't worry about using don't worry about using M dashes or commas or anything. Anything that's not story is scuttled. He gets rid of it. His stories are so lean. His books, even though everybody talks about his amazing dialogue, and it is amazing, it is that sort of staccato type of dialogue, which is very realistic the way people really talk. And it's not just expository, it's also character defining. You learn about these people not only by what they say, but how they say it. And I think that's an amazing skill, something that I definitely have tried to adapt myself.
Very good, very good. The next question, please correct me if I'm wrong. I've heard this said both ways, so please tell me if I'm pronouncing it incorrect. Your character, Beauregard Bug Montague, is it?
It's okay. Beauregard Montage.
Beauregard Montage.
Yeah.
Beauregard Montage. Thank you very much. So Beauregard Bug Montage, your protagonist in Blacktop Wasteland, is both charismatic and unforgettable. And reading this book, I couldn't help but think about the particularly masculine burdens that he seems to carry, and that seemed to drive his decision throughout the book and so much of the plot. So what do you think his journey tells us about the masculine experience and what it means to be a man in today's times?
I think Bug is what a lot of people might today call an anti-hero, but there's an element of of sort of manosphere. How can I put this? Let me rephrase that. Bug is what a lot of people who exist in this modern zeitgeist of the manosphere think they are. They think they're an alpha. They think they're a tough guy. With Bug, I wanted to show the cost of that. How it weighs on you being that way. He's very confident to a fault. He has a little hubris. He's usually thinking he's the smartest person in a room, and he usually is right. But because he has this innate, almost pathological confidence in himself, it makes him make mistakes because he doesn't ask for help. He doesn't allow someone else to come in, even his wife, even his children. And so for me, Bug's journey is a lot about the sort of armor of being a man, especially being a man in the South, in a rural area, and how that can be a little different than sort of the metropolitan versions of manhood you might see in a larger city or a larger area. I grew up in a time where, you weren't supposed to cry if you were a little boy. Never mind a man, like you were a little boy and you get your hand caught in the car door, you're supposed to just hold that, which I think is ridiculous. But but on a less sort of evocative point, Bug is also a very broken character inside. He misses his father. He's a very complicated relationship with his mother. He loves his wife and his two kids with her. He has a very complicated relationship with a daughter from a previous relationship. There's all these moments where he's at the point of fracturing a lot of times. He has to pull it together. And, like in the book, he takes on one last job as a getaway driver or something he had done formerly. He does it also for his kids. He does it for the thrill, to be perfectly frank. And there are moments where he's honest about that in the book, but it's also much more, I think, about this sense of responsibility and trying to use the thing that you're good at to make the money you need. And maybe that's not necessarily the right decision. So there's these dichotomous details to Bug. He's tough, he's virile, he's strong, he's badass. But on the other side, he's a very much broken little boy, who misses his father and wants his mother to love him unconditionally. And so for me, I was trying to encompass all those sort of disparate personality traits in one character and show their journey, how much they change, how much they don't change. So
No, I really saw that because I think one of the things that I liked most about Bug is just how real he was. Some days it's hard to find a character that you can relate to.
mm-hmm.
And I really appreciated the
Thank you.
candidness of the character.
Thank you.
Many of Bug's efforts, as you kind of said, focus on his role as a father. Helping his oldest child, Ariel, attend college is a major priority to him. So, what do you think of the role of colleges in helping people break cycles of poverty and social restrictions? And do colleges still position young people toward opportunities to improve their lives?
Oh, definitely, absolutely. I think college in America is so interesting. I've had the opportunity in the last couple of years to travel to Europe, travel to Scandinavia and places like that. And we hear this bugaboo, we hear this boogeyman of socialism and free colleges. They act like somebody getting free colleges then going to make everybody read, the workers Karl Marx or something. And it's not that at all. And I think what I've learned about in America, I remember I'm older, but I remember as a kid, probably wasn't that expensive. Like Harvard and Yale, things like that were expensive. But if you're a state college, it wasn't. There were limits on what a college could charge. And Reagan came in office and removed those limits in the name of free enterprise. And I think it just made it that much harder for kids to experience what college can do. Is what you said: break generational trauma, break traumas of poverty and classism, allow people to lift themselves up. It's so funny. Not to make a political screed here. It's so funny. You hear a lot of certain type of politicians that will tell you, well, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And I think that's incredibly, like Martin Luther King said, that's incredibly cool. It's cruel to say that to a man with no boots or a woman with no boots. But for me, I think that's why I think it's why they're trying to make college harder and harder to afford, because college is where you go and you understand that the world that you've grown up in is not the only world that exists. It's a way for your mind to travel. And, Mark Twain said, travel is fatal to ignorance. And I thoroughly believe that. You hear a lot of people say, oh, my kids went to college and they got indoctrinated. No, they didn't. What happened to them was that they learned different points of view. Then they realized maybe your point of view back home is not the only one or the right one necessarily. And so for me, I think college is still, people laugh at me because I always say this, even though I didn't finish, I had to drop out. I loved my 2 years at college, Chris Newport University. The ideas, the philosophies, the knowledge, the social sort of embrace that I found there was like nothing I'd ever felt. I came from a town, 8,000 people, and, driving 2 hours to a university because I couldn't afford to stay on campus. But once I got there, it was this sort of citadel of intellect and intrigue and I just really loved it. So I think college are still vastly important. And I think college is where we're learning the cutting edge things, both in technology and in literature and in the arts that will help people down the road, So I think college is massively important. Like I said, if it wasn't important, they wouldn't work so hard to keep so many people out.
Yeah, no, that was really, really interesting to hear. Thank you so much. I loved your insights on that, and I wholeheartedly agree. Moving on, Bug is also a son, of course, along with the burdens of wanting to be a provider for his wife and children. He also tries to do right by his mother, even when she makes it difficult for him. The nursing home scenes in your book are truly alarming, though. Do you see obstacles to safe elder care as an issue in our country and in Virginia?
Oh, yeah. That book was inspired by my mom. My mom had spinal stenosis. And then she also later on developed COPD. So she had a lot of physical ailments. And eventually it was best for everyone that she be in her home. Now, to be fair, my mom's care was not in question. The people that took care of her were amazing, immaculate. But I had seen other places and other individuals and other situations that weren't. And the whole plot, the subplot about the Medicaid clerical error, that happened to us. Like, they were like, oh, her Medicaid hasn't kicked in for 3 months, so you owe X amount. Now, luckily, I'm a writer. At the time, I wasn't as successful as I am now, but I was making a little bit of money. We got to straighten out. But I remember that moment of fear where it wasn't that, oh, I'm afraid my mom's got to move back in with me. It was that moment of like, I'm afraid my mom got to move back in with me. I'm not going to be able to take care of her. Now, what are we going to do? I mean, we got it straight. We fixed it. But so many people in America are at the mercy of a misplaced decimal or a misplaced comma. And so for me, elder care, I think in America, we are not as primarily focused on elder care, I think, the way we should be. But I think that's a part of this sort of psychology of America, of the rabid individualism. It's like, oh, take care of yourself and don't worry about me. I'll worry about myself. The American ideal of imagined individualism. Whereas, like in Europe, I was just in France a couple months ago. Not only is elder care, I think, more looked upon as a community endeavor. Most people don't act elderly. I know, like once you get to a certain age, well, you got to go put on your sweater and drink some Metamucil, and it's over for you. And I don't think they do that in Europe. And I think that is a direct result of our lack of community when it comes to elder care in America. I definitely think that's something that we can prioritize. And it's funny, a lot of people don't pick up on that in the book. That's a big part of the book. His mother's nursing home bill is a huge, and there's so many people that go through that. And so I was hoping that would connect with people. Like I said, it was something that we went through with my mom. That book, Blacktop, is my second book, my first to get published with a major label. And there's a lot of psychological catharsis and autobiographical discussions going on in that book. Or as I like to say, you can tell I'm working through some things. So.
Well, it definitely connects with people, which I think is the whole point of a book and art in general. So, which I consider your book to be art. So thank you for your psychological working through it. It's definitely helped me, and I'm sure many other people as well. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Next, Bug's challenges are further complicated by issues of race and the economy throughout the book. Would you tell us a little more about how these ideas appear in your story and how they relate to themes in your other novels as well as to contemporary times?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm an African American Southerner, which some people think is oxymoron, but it's not. Every scrap of land that somebody who waves a Confederate battle flag walks upon, somebody who looks like me has lived there and loved and embraced life. And so the South belongs to me. It just belongs as much as it belongs to anybody else. Black Southern tradition gives us so many cultural touchstones that are American ideals now. The blues, gospel music, bluegrass are all part of the Southern rural, Black, poor, white experience. And for me, what I wanted to show in Blacktop was there's a character named Ronnie and his brother Reggie. And they're secondary antagonists, but they're also kind of Bug's friend. They're business partners, but they're two white men who are very poor. They use a pejorative for themselves to denote poor white folks. They call themselves that a lot. But they also are representative of what is the other side of the coin from Bug, where Bug is struggling and trying to stay above water and poor, but he has this sense of drive. And I think a lot of growing up in my community, African American community in the South, have that we've got to make it. Not that I want to make it or I deserve to make it. I got to make it. I don't have an option, And so I saw my mom decide between, paying for our own dental appointment or getting us food, And so many people have to face that in America. The tragedy of the lack of an American social network, or safety net. But also I think race. What I want to do with Reggie, go back to him, is to show that there's a white man who's very poor and there's a Black man who's poor, like Bug and Reggie are. Whereas Reggie has a sense of entitlement that he feels like somebody did something wrong to him, and that's why he's poor. And that's he takes his not Reggie, I'm sorry, Ronnie. Reggie is the one who tells Ronnie, maybe we're just dumb. It's like, and so but I wanted to show the sort of camaraderie of poverty that exists in the South. I always say the greatest trick so-called elites ever did was convince poor whites that their enemies were poor Blacks. Because when you see class become a non-factor and the working class stop dividing themselves, you see great things start to happen. Fred Hampton in Chicago, I think, was murdered because he was trying to create what he called a rainbow league. Regardless of whether you're white, Black, Hispanic, whatever, we're a people's party. We want to work together to try to make things better for people. And I think whenever you see people try to break down those barriers, you see the status quo respond with an outsized response. But back to the book with Buddy Lee with Bug and Ronnie, they're, like I said, two sides of the same coin in a way. Bug has the skill, is intelligent, but doesn't have the opportunities. Ronnie wants the opportunities, thinks he deserves them, but doesn't have the education and the intellect to carry him through. And I think that's a big case in a lot of rural communities. Not every white person is a Ronnie, not every Black person is a Bug, but poor Blacks and poor whites have more in common than they have as far as differences. And I was trying to show that a little bit in the book, that these two men are pretty much on the same level, except this man has the benefits of 400 years of racial and white supremacy. And or to the joke that I tell a friend of mine when we having a debate about what white privilege is, and he was saying, I still work every day. I got to go to work. I got to pay bills. Where's my privilege? And I said, white privilege is not a guarantee of success. It just means that your life has never been harder because you're white. And Ronnie doesn't understand that, and Bug does, and I think that's sort of telling about the community relationships in the South.
Thank you. That was an amazing answer. I liked that. Your book is a tremendously successful Southern crime thriller. In many ways, it's a family story as well. As we learn about Bug's relationship with his parents and see his concerns regarding his children, especially his sons, the story also seems to comment on intergenerational trauma. Could you tell us a little more about the cycles of poverty and violence in the story? And did you observe these issues of poverty and violence as you grew up in Virginia?
Yeah, I was lucky, even though we were really poor growing up. I mean, I like to say we were dirt floor poor. I didn't have running water, indoor plumbing until I was 16. So I used to draw water out of a well, chop wood in the winter. I lived this very rustic. I remember watching Sounder, the movie Sounder, in school, and they were like, "Oh yeah, this denotes times for Black people in the 30s." I said, "I'm pulling water out of a well now. What are you talking about?" But for me, I was very lucky. I didn't see a lot of violence around me. My father and mom were estranged, but my dad never spanked me. He one of the biggest, strongest guys I ever knew in my life. He didn't believe in corporal punishment. My mom did, but then she physically, it's not funny. She believed in corporal punishment, but she physically couldn't do it. Like she would tell us, "Come stand in front of my wheelchair so I can smack it." No, I don't think so. I got in trouble a lot for that. But I didn't see violence in that way. I did see a lot of poverty and class struggle, though. I remember seeing my dad and mom get dressed up to go out on a Friday night. And my dad worked as a fisherman for about 40 years. So it's a night where he's made a good catch. He's got a lot of money. And I remember thinking, they work all week for this. They work all week to go out and look nice and smell good. And for a moment, forget that, you live in a place that may not value you as a person. But at the same time, I've seen my friend, I'm one of my best friends as a white guy, and we met in kindergarten. And I remember seeing his family struggle and how his mother was so ashamed to go to the social service department to get food for the needy that she would make him go in, and she would park down the road, as we say, down the road a piece. And so these ideas of how shame affects class and how class affects economics, and then how does race affect everything? Everybody will tell you when you're talking about social interdisciplinary issues in sociology. Well, why do you always got to keep bringing up race? Race is a foundational tenet of the American experiment. The Constitution, we just had our 4th of July. No, I'm not the first person to point out the irony of, men writing a Declaration of Independence who owned slaves, or who subjugated women, or who eradicated indigenous populations. And so I think to take race out of the equation is to not talk about America honestly. Like there's this line in the book where Bug thinks about a counselor he had when he was in juvenile hall. He said, "You should be an engineer." And he said something to the effect of, "That's a nice dream for people to have options, but I don't." And so for me, growing up, I saw a lot of that. I saw, disrespect of my father and his friends as grown men, standing outside of a convenience store talking and getting hassled by the sheriff. I remember in school how race was such a divisive topic and people didn't want to talk about it. How I remember that the Civil War was still called the War of Northern Aggression when I was in 3rd grade. And so, like I say in the book, well, not this book, but I say in another book, I don't think there's no place more confused by past or more afraid of its future than the South. But to paraphrase James Baldwin, I love the South. I'm a citizen in the South because I reserve the right to criticize it because I know it can be better. And so race is always prevalent in my books. Sometimes it's a major factor, like in Blacktop or in All the Sinners Bleed. Sometimes it's a minor but contributing factor, like in Razor Blade Tears, or sometimes it's a tangential factor, like in King of Ashes, where race is not as prevalently discussed as in the other books because this is a predominantly Black city that I'm working in King of Ashes. I think the only book, even my book, My Darkest Prayer, race is a factor. The main character is biracial, has a white father, Black mother. One of his best friends is white. His other best friend is Black. His white best friend is the outlaw, and his black best friend is a environmental studies nerd. And I like that. I like switching that up. I like that. Having that sort of ability to have friends in both worlds and so forth. But yeah, race is always going to be something that I talk about personally. Maybe not as prevalently, but it's always going to be a part of my books because it's a part of my experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Should readers walk away from your story with a Southern or Faulknerian sense of fate and doom, or can readers hope that Bug might be able to live a more stable and peaceful life and break out of that cycle?
People always ask me about the ending of the book because I ended it in sort of an ambiguous way. I think you could take sort of the Faulknerian idea of the past never being really the past, and that even if he does get away this time and walks away clean, that circle will come back around again. The temptation will be there. And what will he do the next time? That the easiest way to solve a problem is just a steering wheel away. How will he handle it? So for me, I want people to walk away with the idea that his story is not done yet. I always think of a book as a snapshot in the character's life. There's a lot of stuff that happened before we open the book. There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen after we close the pages. But for me, I think we caught Bug in this moment of as Jules will say in Pulp Fiction, as a moment of transition. Maybe he's trying to be better. Maybe he's going to do what his wife asks and not be the same as his father. So we'll see. We'll see. I always tell people, I used to have a smart aleck answer because people would ask me, what happens to Bug and kids stay together? What happens to the kids? And I used to say, I don't know. That's when I stopped writing. And there was a lady in Atlanta did not like that at all. So, and she was an older lady and I had to come up with a new answer. So I don't say that anymore. I said, what do you think happened? And then we move on from there.
I like that answer. It was being sassy.
Yeah.
I do like it. I do like it. All of your characters, as I mentioned, are truly memorable. And while Bug often seems to have to carry his burdens alone, his family, and particularly his Uncle Booney and cousin Kelvin, actually go to great lengths to support him. Did you have any literary or real life inspiration for Uncle Booney or cousin Kelvin?
Uncle Booney he's Bug's godfather, uncle, his dad's best friend. Booney is an amalgamation and a compilation of a lot of older black and white men that I grew up with in a small southern town, that work blue collar jobs. Booney owns a scrap yard, and these guys who are outwardly very, I don't say abrasive, brusque, but inwardly they love people, they love their family, they love their friends. It's these tough, really hardcore guys who are the ones that are most secure to tell you I love you and I care about you. I also wanted to show black love between men. These men who, like you say, Kelvin and Anthony, Kelvin and Bug and Booney, that they love each other. Booney loves Bug as a son. Calvin loves him as a brother, even though those are not their actual, legal relations. And so I wanted to show that depth of care. I think a lot of times black men in popular fiction get a bad rap as being unable to access our emotions. I think men in general have a hard time accessing their emotion, but I've never seen more forthright, honest love than I've seen between my uncles at a cookout and between their friends sitting around, on a porch drinking moonshine. That sort of subtle but powerful sense of I love you and I'll do anything for you. And I wanted to show that with Bug and Booney and I've carried that thought through with other books, between the characters in Raised by Tears, even though they're not related at all. The two main characters, by the end of the book, they're brothers. There's a male love, a male respect, a male care. With All the Sinners Bleed, the lead character Titus and his brother and his father love each other immensely, and it's not a toxic love. It's funny because if you read Blacktop, there's a lot of complex emotions that Bug has about his father, about his mother. It's very, because you could say toxic, you could say unhealthy, you could say dysfunctional. But I'm kind of moved on from that with All the Sinners, where I love that the main character and his father, while they don't agree on everything, nobody does, their love is not wrapped in this sort of psychological immaturity, that they just love each other for who they are. Their love is not toxic. It's clean and it's unfettered by a lot of concerns about the past. And with his brothers, the same thing. There's a scene in that book where, Titus is the sheriff of his town, and his brother's sort of a roundabout kid who's kind of on the periphery of criminal activity, and he beats up this guy in a bar and when Titus asks him, "Why'd you get in a fight?" He said, "Because they was talking about my brother." They love each other. And then with my last book, the most recent, King of Ashes, which is a tragedy, but the tragedy doesn't work if you don't believe the three siblings in that book love each other. So I've been trying to work showing these relations with Black men and their friendships and their loves of familial and agape love, and for me, I think that's very important because, like I said, a lot of times Black male characters get a bad rap sometimes.
No, I really appreciate that perspective in your book. So it's really refreshing, and I think people need that now more than ever. So
Thank you.
yes. My last question, with a few questions tagged on, of course. I'll give you the first one, and then I'll give you the follow-ups. So we were drawn to your book's Virginia setting and noticed that some of your other stories are also taking place in Virginia. Do you plan to publish more novels soon?
Yeah, I'm working. It's funny you asked about Virginia. I'm working on one right now. It's my first novel that's not set entirely in Virginia.
Okay.
It's a period piece, which I'm older than you guys, but even me saying a period piece is 1981 is just horrifying. But it's a period piece set in 1981. It's called Highway Full of Night. And it's sort of I don't want to say it's a prequel to Blacktop Wasteland. You don't have to have read Blacktop Wasteland to read this book, but it is about his father when his father was younger than Bug is when we meet him in the book. So his father's 22-year-old in 1981. He's also a getaway driver, has been mentioned in other places. He does a job in Washington, D.C. that goes terribly sideways, and so he has to get out of town. And he has a friend named Buster whose big dream is to go, he's a guitarist. He graduated with a music degree from VCU, and his big dream is to go to L.A., go to Los Angeles, and become a musician. And like a backup musician, a session musician, until he gets his own band. So he has a plan. And so after Anthony gets in trouble, he said, hey, can I jump in your van? I'm a mechanic. I'll keep your van running, and we'll go to California together. And his friend is like, yeah, all right, come on. So that's kind of where the book starts. And then once he gets to California, Los Angeles, Pasadena specifically, he sees himself, he falls in with his friend Buster's friends, who are all aspiring artists, singers, comedians, actresses, actors, and he falls in with them. And for a moment, he thinks, oh, I could have this life. This could be a really great life. And then, of course, because it's a crime novel, he meets some people at a drag race that offer him a job, and then we're off to the races, so to speak. But yeah, I'm very interested in seeing how this works. The challenge of writing outside of Virginia, the challenge of trying to create a story set on a different timeline, so to speak. But I'm also really excited to show Los Angeles through the eyes of this, at the beginning of the book, this kid who's never been west of the Mississippi, but he's also, one of the best getaway drivers in America. So I wanted to show that this unique place, unique world through his eyes. And so how the West Coast ethos bumps up against sort of the East Coast Southern mentality. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Excited to read that later. Sounds exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no. My last question for you. Virginia has a very complicated history, to say the least, but it's also arguably a magical place, such as how Poe portrays it in his Tale of the Ragged Mountains. In your opinion, what makes Virginia a great place for stories and storytelling?
I think Virginia is such an incredible sort of micro version of the macro version of America, right? You have Northern Virginia, which is metropolitan and sophisticated, and sort of this, either you could call it Northern Atlanta or Southern New York, but there is this sense of, almost otherworldly sophistication. You have people, international centers and stuff like that, but then you move over 2 hours and you go into the mountains in Appalachia, and far out in Christiansburg and Blacksburg. But you come back down, you come down, you come east, you come to the water, the Chesapeake Bay. Like I said, my dad was a waterman for 40 years. So I think these disparate geographical locations have both, also have disparate cultures that you can use in a story, that you can use for storytelling. There's a great writer that not a lot of people know. He was originally from West Virginia, but he lived a lot in Virginia, named Brees J. Pancake. And Brees J. Pancake said that Virginia is a place of stories because of Virginia is a place of ghosts. And I think that's true.
Thank you very much to S.A. Cosby for this wonderful interview. And thanks again to Libby, Febronia, and Professor Hammond. Next episode, we will investigate Heidi Christopher's Lies the Dirt Keeps, and we'll get to speak with the author herself, as well as more special interviews. You can support us at su.edu/arts/English. And I'm Andrew Wood. I'll see you in the next one.